Okay, with no further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to bring onto the screen Maurice Selwyn, who is an amazing volunteer. He's also chair of our fundraising committee, and it's through him that we are so grateful to have Leslie Cavendish with us. So please welcome Maurice Selwyn to your screens.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dahlia, for a beautiful intro, as always. Great to see you. Good evening, people out there. We're in for a real thrill tonight, a real treat, because tonight we welcome a man who single-handedly helped to shape the hair of a generation and was part of the exclusive inner sanctum of the Beatles. Our special guest will enthrall us all with some incredible stories and anecdotes and will delight us with his knowledge of what some people say was the best era ever to grow up in. So please join me for an evening of reminiscing from those heady days of Beatlemania to flower power and beyond. So now I invite you, get your mod clothes out, put your Lambretta and your Vespers away, put some flowers in your hair, put on your Levi 501s and your Afghan coats. And the girls, put on your white patent boots and feather boas, and boys, put on your collarless jackets and Ben Sherman shirts, as I now introduce you to our special guest, Leslie Cavendish.
Thank you, Maurice. Really nice
Hi,
intro.
Leslie.
Really nice to see you again.
Well, it's really nice to see you. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful stories with us tonight. So let's start right at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing.
Okay, so my upbringing was, my parents were born in Cable Street in the East End, if people know that, very near Tower Bridge. And they managed to carry me off after 2 years to a new Jewish settlement called, well, it wasn't quite Edgware. I'd like to have, been Edgware, but it was actually Burnt Oak. The reason why I would like it to have been Edgware, because when I used to go home from work, I used to fall asleep. And if I fell asleep and woke up at Edgware, it was a longer walk home than it was at Burnt Oak. So I was brought up there, which was a nice, loud, typical Jewish household with lots of shouting, lots of love, I must say. And a few years later, the house next door became vacant. And my dear mother, who used to really miss her mother and father, she used to go every day to the East End to see them, although she was living back in Edgware, Burnt Oak. We managed to buy the house next door. So with that, we knocked the garden fence down in the middle, and we had this great big house, which was fantastic. And my mum had quite a few sisters, but she had a sister, a younger one, that was only 18 months older than me. My grandmother had her when she was 48 years old, and I think my mum told me that she didn't know she was pregnant. So we lived in that household, and then my aunt was married to a musician that she had 2 children by, and he did a runner, basically, started running over the country. So my aunt decided to live next door with my grandmother with her 2 children. And we used to really have a great big funny time running from house to house. If one shouted at the other person, we run next door. And yeah, it was a really nice household. Enjoyed it.
At age 15, like all teenagers of the time, you were into pop music. And one day you saw an advert in the Jewish Chronicle.
I did indeed, now, yeah.
Who would have dreamt that you would go on to become the hairdresser to the main act? So tell us a little bit about this, about the adverts.
This was quite interesting because on a Sunday night, just by Leicester Square, there's quite an upmarket club called the Pigalle, which was, I think, a dinner and dance place. But on a Sunday night, this guy used to hire it out for the evening, mainly for Jewish people. I think it was a Jewish charity involved. And you would see people like Freddie and the Dreamers and just these bands that you would sort of hear. They may have had one hit. And looking in the Jewish Chronicle, we used to go out with my mates on a Sunday night And I saw this advert, the Beatles, April the 21st, couldn't believe it. The more it came to that date, the Beatles started having quite a few hit records. And on that particular day, 21st, at the Empire Wembley Arena, the New Music Express Awards were it was a really big deal for the, for music people to be recognized. And although the Beatles didn't win it, they won the most up and coming band. And they did their three songs, I think they did, and in front of 10,000 people, screaming people, not just to see them, to see all these other people as well. And I'm thinking to myself, the time they, when whoever advertised this didn't know that the Beatles were going to be there. I'm sure Brian Epstein didn't know about that. And I thought there's no way the Beatles are going to be coming from Wembley, which it wasn't, that far away, going to bother to come at 9:30 at night from a big do like that. But I give it to Brian Epstein, which is a fantastic man. He kept his word. He could have very easily pulled out of that. He decided not to. He kept his word, and bang on 9:30, boys came on. I think it was about 10 o'clock in their suits, the Beatles suits. They did their their standard 4 songs, which lasted 29 minutes. You would push it if it went to 30. And in fact, all the tours they ever did in America, Europe, people think, oh, we're going to go and see a Beatles concert. It's not like today, you're going to see U2 or Pink Floyd or anybody, or even McCartney. You go to McCartney, you can't get him off stage for 3 hours. The Beatles did 29 minutes and that was it. And it was actually really exciting. And as you said, I didn't think, I was only 20 yards from the stage as well, looking at their hair, watching them going, yeah, yeah, yeah. And 3 years later, I was going, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I noticed on that one that the admission price was 12 shillings and sixpence.
A lot of money, Morris.
Was it? I was going to ask you, did you think it was a lot of money?
Yeah, I think I borrowed it from my mum. I think I borrowed the sixpence, something. No, it was good. You saved up, the Beatles, it wasn't Elvis, but it was the Beatles. And it was something that I got a grip on. And it was something that I thought, yeah. And, there's only 200 people there. So it was a very intimate little gig.
Okay. So I'm just going forward slightly. What was it that made you want to go into hairdressing?
Well, you're going to blame my good friend Lawrence Falk for that. Lawrence and I have been mates since we were 11. We used to go to Shandor School in Stanmore. And like all people, especially Lawrence and myself, wanted to be footballers. Well, Lawrence was actually a really good footballer. I was a defender. I could score own goals and I could save goals. Lawrence used to score loads of goals, but he happened to be 9 months in a class. He was 9 months older than me, which made him leave school 9 months before me. And we used to see each other. And one day I just said to him, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm in hairdressing, a place called Eric and Baker Street. I said, oh, why is that? And he said, no, it's really good trade, really good trade. I said, okay, left it at that. And I went round to see my mother in Burnt Oak, and outside, to go and pick her up or walk with her back to the house. I saw this big American Pontiac car outside on the Edgware Road. It's not the type of car you'd see there. I went inside and there was this guy, Tony. He was in the middle. He was cutting this lady's hair. Next to him, there were 2 other lady stylists there, and they were obviously doing ladies' hair. There were 3 other ladies waiting, and there was me just sitting there waiting for my mum. And I was just looking around thinking, what a great environment. You wake up in the morning, you go into a salon, and you're dressing people's hair. And I then suddenly thought, no wonder Lawrence is going into this trade. So I went and asked him, and I said, right, I now know why you did it, and where do I go? And it was through him that he told me to stop. I thought maybe I could start at his place where he was. He said, no, you go to Vidal Sassoon.
Was Vidal Sassoon your first apprenticeship?
It was. I left school at 15. At school, I used to have the guys come around from Rota Print, who were in Honeypot Lane. I remember that. Then you had Frigidaire, that was in Colindale. and they would send all these guys around and saying, you know, the jobs are available to do an apprenticeship. Didn't appeal to me at all. Didn't appeal to me to sit and study. I really liked sport, and the idea of being a hairdresser, thought, why not? The only problem is that I wasn't artistic. But I mean, Lawrence and I never really talked about it. We didn't sit there drawing the whole time, but he went into it, so why not?
I think there's quite an interesting story about your interview.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as I said, I wasn't very good at drawing, but we had this woodwork teacher, and we made this wooden bowl on this lathe. And, you know, if you start shaping the bowl and everything, well, this particular bowl, which I did, I was quite proud of it, but it was wobbly, it was wonky. I took it home, I put it on the table at home. I just used to look at it, just thought, you know, I made that. When I got the interview to go to Vidal's, they told me to, you know, come up and see them. Never been, you know, number 171 New Bond Street, they said. So got out of Bond Street station, walked down the Bond Street itself, never saw shops like Gucci and Asprey's and all these wonderful shops with diamonds glittering out of the windows there. I put the bowl in a plastic bag. So, you know, literally just a carrier bag, walked down, get to 171 New Bond Street, walked in. Now, this was nothing like the salon that my mum went to. This was a full glass window from top to bottom, ladies on the reception. It looked good. It looked good. And there I am sitting at the reception with my plastic bag. A guy called Mr. Gordon comes along. Everyone was Mr. You know, he introduced himself as Mr. Gordon. Would you like to come through to the salon? Go downstairs. Walk through this salon, just looking around. There's no music, but there were chaise lounges there. You know, ladies with their hands in their buckets and feet in their buckets, and everything was, you know, all completely different. And space helmet dryers all under, and people running around the salon there, really looking good. And they were all wearing, you know, the old program, Dr. Kildare. They had these Dr. Kildare overalls on, and went downstairs to the basement, sat down. This Mr. Gordon sat down as well and said, why do you want to be a hairdresser, Leslie? What makes you think you'll be a good hairdresser? And I sort of thought, okay, why? So I picked up the wooden bowl, put it on the table, and I said, Mr. Gordon, the way I shape this wooden bowl is the way I think I could shape women's hair. And that's the reason why I would like to be a hairdresser. He gave me a look, and I thought, it didn't sound right. He didn't sort of go, oh, great, you know, then yes, you've really got it. He asked me a few more questions. Said, thank you very much for being in touch. 3 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, he rang up and said, we'd like you to come down and have an interview. Like you to start at Sassoon's. And when I got there, he did tell me that he said, I couldn't wait to tell people, I couldn't believe you just put that wooden bowl down and said, this is the way, you know, this is at Sassoon's, the greatest hair cutting, right? That I'm going to shape women's hair. But, you know, I got the job, and thank you, the wooden bowl.
Well, how did it feel to be working at such an iconic establishment, and indeed with the great man himself?
It was quite amazing, actually, because one of my mother's other sisters, my Aunt Gladys, used to go to a club in the East End with him. You know, Vidal trained at Adolf Hitler, that sounds a good one, Adolf Cohen.
Yeah, Professor Adolf Cohen.
Yes, we'll slip that one out. He, to me, was an East End guy. When I saw him, I've never seen a guy dressed so beautifully. You know, he had sort of Dougie Hayward suits on, Frank Foster shirts, shoes from Pinet. He looked the part. And when he used to cut hair, the movement of the scissors with the comb, his mouth used to sort of twist to every cut and every shape. And he would sort of flick the hair with his hands, and he would dance around like Nureyev. It was quite fascinating to see, because he used to come in, he used to go from salon to salon. There was Grosvenor House, Bond Street. You had other guys at the shop, at the salon, who were completely different type of characters, which made it great because you had hair cutters, you had hair stylists, and you had people who could do chignons, and some couldn't do chignons. Some were quick, some were slow. But to watch Vidal, it was like watching an artist at work, and you really was an artist because he was inventing all these different types of cuts that you could, and all these on. It was amazing. It was completely different from where he learned, from Teasy Weezy which was Raymond. If anybody didn't know, that was all backcombing and lacquer and completely different. It was fascinating work in there.
Just something for you and me. When I was an apprentice 250 years ago as a Saturday boy, one of my jobs was to water down the life text.
Oh yeah,
yeah. My boss.
You better tell people what that is.
Yeah, well, you can explain it. But I used to have to tip it out into a jug, top it up with water, and then pour it back into the bottles. I can say that now after all these years, but of course I didn't say it then.
One of the things we had to do, I remember, because when I was at Vidal's, one of the things was you had a 3-year apprenticeship, and how it worked was you would work at you would work with a stylist for every 3 months, so to learn different types of cutting techniques, and just for yourself, just to see how, like I worked with a guy that never spoke, I worked with a guy that didn't stop talking, so you meet all these different types of people, you work out your own character. But the ultimate was that if you end up being asked to work for to be Sassoon's junior, you sort of knew that unless you did anything outrageously wrong, you would be actually working at Sassoon's. If you didn't, there was nothing wrong in that. You would just get a certificate to say that you were Sassoon trained, and then you could go anywhere to any salon and say, I trained at Sassoon's, and it was your passport to hairdressing. It was, and I'm sure it is today, a passport, because you know how to do hair, you're in control of hair, and it's an important thing.
Well, in respect of that, how and where did you first meet this lady, and what did it lead to?
Well, that lady's got the most lovely, lovely, lovely thick hair.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Yeah. So, I told you I worked with someone that not people who spoke a lot, people who kept quiet, and I had worked with a guy called Roger Thompson, who wasn't a great talker. He was a fantastic hair cutter. Got to give it to him. He became artistic director to Vidal's. He opened up the salon in New York, but at the time I worked with him in Grosvenor House salon, and Jane was one of his clients. Now, one of the things you were taught at Vidal's was not to always remember that person is a client. You can be friends, you think you could be friends, you can be mates and whatever, but you are working to make sure that their hair's okay. So she's a client. And you never sort of asked really what they're doing, what's happening. If they want to speak, they did. And often, people, you're meeting people at sometimes 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning, fashion hairdressers coming in, newspaper people coming in early. They've got no makeup. They come straight from the house to there. So they don't want to talk. And when they do want to talk, you talk to them. And if they do, they do. If they don't. Jane was one of those people that came in that I knew, and everybody knew, that she was Paul McCartney's girlfriend. So what do? You don't say, hi, how's Paul? What the Beatles, you just kept quiet. And Roger used to do her hair, and when he used to trim her hair, her hair being very long, so she only really had the fringe and the bottom of the ends cut. And I used to wash it, and then I used to go and do the blow dry, which would take me about 35 minutes because she had very thick, porous hair. And when I'd finish, I'd go over to Roger and I'd say, Roger, Mr. Roger, Miss Asher's ready. And he said, okay, won't be a second. Then he would stop the client. He'd run over because I've done all the hard work, right? And all he would do is sort of touch it and do the typical hairdressing thing with the hair, flip around, touch the fringe. And he would then, get to Leslie the back mirror, and I'd get the back mirror, and he would go like that, and she'd go, "Thank you, Roger," and that was fantastic, and he'd go off to his client. So I used to wash her hair. I used to do that. I suddenly became a stylist at Beatles. So now I've got my own junior to wash my own clients, and I would be the hairdresser. But in between that, because I'm trying to build up a clientele, we used to have a lot of clients came in for a sort of a comb out, you know, where you wouldn't actually book the appointment. If you're going somewhere, you may just want your hair quickly washed and blow dried. And Jane used to come in, and as I said, Roger, we used to do clients every half hour. You know, there were guys that used to do them every 15 minutes, but Roger, half hour. You could, you know, Roger needed an hour and a half to cut hair. So you can imagine the time we'd started at 8:30, he was behind by 9:30. And he had all these clients building up. Jane would come in, and the receptionist would go to him, could you do, Jane Asher's just turned in, could you do her hair? And he would say, actually, I'm really busy. Why don't you get Leslie to do it? So she came over and I started doing it, and that was fine. I knew exactly, I got the guy to wash her hair. I started blow drying it again, and that was fine. 2 or 3 times this happened, until on the 4th occasion, the receptionist came down to me and said, Leslie, said, Jane's in, and again, Roger can't do her hair. Can you do it? And it was a Saturday morning. It was about 11:30, and 11:30 is normally the last client. And in the afternoon, because we only worked half day in those days, I would go to football match in the afternoon to go see my team. And I thought, okay, that's fine. Started doing her hair, finished her hair, thought that was it. Showed her the back mirror. Yep, lovely. That Leslie, that's really good. And then she said to me, what are you doing this afternoon? And I just looked at her, you know, and I said, why is that? She said, have you got time to cut my boyfriend's hair? You know, and I've never ever mentioned, she used to tell me she was filming, never mentioned Paul McCartney, never mentioned the Beatles ever. Have you got time to cut my boyfriend's hair? And I said, sure, of course I have. Have I got time to cut your boyfriend's hair? I think so. Fine. I said, what time? And then she said, what time suits you? I think about it. I've always thought about this, and I was just thinking, right, you know, but the team I go to Queen's Park Rangers at Shepherd's Bush. 3 o'clock the game starts, finishes 10 to 5. I could jump in my car, and they lived over near Lord's Cricket Ground. And I thought, 5:30, is that okay? So she went, yes, that's fine, Leslie, that's fine. And I was thinking, if she'd said like in the next hour, I would have gone the next hour. And I said, okay, that's great. And I said, could you tell me where you live, please? So she wrote down, she's got a piece of paper and a pencil, and she wrote down 7 Cavendish Avenue. And I said, Jane, I said, that's my surname. And she said, well, maybe it was meant. So there you go. That's how my team won 3-1 that day, by the way.
That's terrific. I mean, obviously, we're going to touch much more on this story.
Yeah.
But I've got a couple of other things that I really want to ask you, because you told me one day you washed the hair of an attractive lady called Mandy, who had a friend called Christine.
Yeah, I did.
When did you first realize who these ladies were?
No idea. Roger had a great clientele, and Roger's used to do Mandy Rice Davis's hair. Miss Davis, as far as I was concerned. And Roger said to me, there was a lot of times Roger would say to me, Leslie, can you get in at 8 o'clock? I'm doing the editor of Vogue. She's coming in, she wanted to do her hair. Yep, okay, that's fine. And he said, can you come in tomorrow? I've got a client coming in. I like to come in. Yeah, of course I would. I was 15. Of course I would come in that early. I was working with another guy there that started at the same time as me. And I was asked to wash Mandy Rice Davis's hair. She was still Miss Davis to me, her blonde hair. The other guy, the lovely guy called Alan McEwen, he washed Christine Keeler's hair, Miss Keeler. We're just washing the hair. This is early in the morning in the salon. Then they finished their hair. Roger shows her the back of the hair. Everything's sort of ready actually for really the morning's work. And I'm sitting there. Next thing I know, they look quite glamorous, you know, for that time in the morning. Couldn't quite work out with a full makeup, and they look good, you know. And they both walk out together. So it was like synchronized walking out. And I could see a Rolls Royce outside. Then I see a guy in a chauffeur gets out, opens the door for these 2 ladies. And I'm thinking, who are these two people? What are they doing this time in the morning? Must be someone really important. And then it was only later, the following day, that he used to take them to the Old Bailey every day for the Keeler trial. I just thought it was quite funny, you know, because, you know, there they were, they're getting their hair done, looking great. And I think the News of the World had bought their stories, so they were supplying everything for them. So yeah, that was my little brush with Miss Davis and Miss Keeler.
Okay, well, you also had a close encounter in the salon lift when you literally bumped into two very famous starlets. Again, did you immediately recognize them?
Well, you can't miss them, can you, Morris? Let's put it that way. You know,
I was looking at their hair.
Yes, that's what I'm doing. Both blondes. What happened was Dinah Dawes was a client of one of the guys, a guy called Ricky Burns, and I used to wash her hair, and they used to talk the whole time because this guy Ricky used to spend weekends at her place down at the countryside, and when this used to come in, I would always hear, "Oh, what a fabulous time we had, Ricky!" You know, everything sounded fabulous, you know, and when I used to wash her hair, I used to sort of say, "Did you have a nice weekend?" And used to talk, and she was a bit flirtatious, I must admit, you know, but in a nice way, you know, just in a nice way. And she used to walk around. What happened was that because she had long hair, before a lot of the clients that had long hair used to remove their tops and just have the gowns underneath, so the stylist could cut their hair on their neck. So he would put the gown just on her shoulder and he would cut it down, everything normal, just do that. And that's what used to happen with Dinah Dawes. And one day she said to me, "Oh, I've got a friend of mine that's coming tomorrow. I bet you'll like her, Leslie." And I said, "Oh, really?" No, innocent little kid there. And downstairs at the Grosvenor House salon, so that you had the main entrance, then you had to come down the stairs, and there's the marble steps, and you walk down, and then she came down first. And then you happen to see the other blonde, happened to be Jane Mansfield. You had two of the blonde bombshells and, you know, starlets around. Anyway, they came into the salon, they sat down, and the guy said, "Leslie, I've arranged for both have tints upstairs, which was on the third floor. Would you please escort them upstairs?" So I said, "Yep, okay." So go up to into the sort of not the ground floor, just by the basement lift, which is the tiniest lift, Morris, I can tell you. It was one of those really tiny lifts, and I was going red. I must admit, I was red, and they were giggling, and I put my back against the wall of the lift, and I've got Dinah Dawes on my right, I've got Jane Mansfield on my left, and they were giggling. That was actually, for one mad moment, I wish I was going on the 60th floor. And then I would have realized, but it was all over in a flash. And I went out and yeah, they were giggling the whole way up, you know. So yeah, funny.
Were you aware that you were slap bang in the middle of the swinging 60s? And how much of an influence did the actual swinging 60s have on you?
Well, it was a big difference because knowingly and unknowingly, I mean, when I started at Vidal's at the age of 15, you know, there were a lot of people there that were gay, but they couldn't, you know, when, for instance, we would talk on a Monday morning, what weekend did you do? You went with girls, whatever, you know, never thought about it. These guys couldn't say anything. So yeah, time 67 came around, and it was, you know, you could come out basically. You know, I realized that was an important thing that's going on. I realized that music had changed. You know, I sort of was getting into, you know, started off, my first record that I loved was by Cliff Richard, believe it or not, a song called Move It. I think it's one of the great songs, but I remember hearing that and thinking that was good. Then you heard some, you know, my mum used to listen to Perry Como, we used to listen to things like that. And suddenly, you know, I'm listening to people like the Kinks, the Animals, the Beatles, the Stones, you know. So, and then the culture of the fashion was going on as well. So, you know, you became all involved in that. You realize you were aware. Plus, on top of everything else, your hair was long. you know, people could be accepted with long hair. You could not wear a tie. You know, you could go to places and into places, not wear a tie, and you became quite aware. And the thing that really hit me was the color. You know, I remember starting off, it must have, you know, gray skies, you know, time I hit the 60s and working and seeing what was going on, the culture changed to color. And I'm telling you, that was a big difference. And it was a major thing because we all wore flower shirts, you know, you wore bright green apple velvet jackets, you wore what you liked actually. And it was nice to see photographers, you know, people like Bailey, Eric Swain, and all these people, you know, Cockney guys, you know, actors like Terry Stamp, you know, got normal guys from up north, you know, with accents. You saw this culture change, and yeah, I was in the middle of that, knowingly, because I was just growing up, and it was yeah. So made a big difference to me.
Tell us briefly about that very first time that you went to Paul's house.
Very first time I went to Paul's house was I left Shepherd's Bush, jumped in the car. I had my equipment in my little Mini, drove to Cavendish Avenue. I then parked just a little bit up the road because I was a bit nervous that I was going to cut Guy's hair, Paul McCartney's hair especially, because I've been playing his records at home. And I had a cousin that, you know, as I told you, in the family house we lived in, had pictures of Paul McCartney on the wall, and one had George, Paul, whatever. But it was basically Paul that they all loved. And I'm going around to cut his hair. So outside the door, you know, George Harrison wrote a song about these ladies called the Apple Scruffs. And they weren't the guys, they weren't the girls that would pull your hair out or start screaming. They just were there. You know, they would know everybody that went in and everybody that went out. And I'm sure they asked people, could you get me their autograph? So I took a deep breath because I was a Beatle fan, and I've got to go along and be a hairdresser, professional hairdresser. So I pressed the buzzer and the housekeeper said, "Hello, Mr. McCartney," very proper. She was Australian, actually. "Mr. McCartney is expecting you." I thought, okay, fine. Open the door closes, electric doors, and I see a green Aston Martin on my left. And I was just thinking to myself, right, there's only one other person who's got an Aston Martin, that's James Bond. So here we got the Aston Martin on my left. I'm going to see Paul McCartney. I'm building myself up to like, okay, Leslie, fine. I'm thinking to myself, the moment that I press the buzzer at the door, the housekeeper will then say, "Hello, take me in somewhere." And I'd wait for Mr. McCartney to come down, and that would be it, introduction. So I pressed the buzzer. Next thing, McCartney's at the door with his tank top, fair old sweater. Said, "Hello, Leslie." He said, "James told me all about you. You'd like to come in, please?" Yes, please. He said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" So I said, "Yes, please, no sugar." Went into his front room. Got a great big hairy dog running around like a nutcase, you know, which is Martha, the old English sheepdog. I've got, there's a psychedelic, you know, a painted piano. There's guitars around. There is albums. There's cassettes around. And it was a bit untidy, the room, because you could see Jane hadn't been there. You know, he needed a woman's touch. And then you've got this, you know, it was just, I'm sitting there. Normally, had this appointment been at the salon, it would have been the normal thing. Come down, sit in front of the mirror, put a gown around him, have a little chat, talk what it's like. But next thing, we got tea coming in. So I was having tea with him. You know, I'd only been there 10 minutes. It took me a while to think, how am I going to say, right, let's go and cut your hair? Which I did. I eventually got round to it and said, you know, where are we going to do your hair? And he said, "We'll do it upstairs in the bedroom. You know, we got a bathroom, we got an ensuite." I didn't know what an ensuite was. He said he's got. I said, okay, so we go upstairs to his bedroom and then go into the bathroom. I take the chair from the dressing table, put it in the bathroom. So he is now I'm looking at him in the mirror, and that was my first encounter. I did say to him, you know, normal question was, how do you want your hair? And he said to me, just see it, just cut it the way you see it. And every time, any Beatle I ever cut, you know, never once did they ever say to me, I want it cut like this. They all said to me, just do it as you see it, or just do it, you know. So that was my very first encounter with McCartney, and I cut it, I left, and I thought to myself, well, you've cut Paul McCartney's hair. Didn't think that I'd be asked to go back. So, and also as well, Morris, which was, it's all to do with timing, because I cut McCartney's hair in September 1966. The Beatles' last concert in Candlestick Park was in August 1966. So when I saw Paul McCartney, although he's a Beatle, he wasn't, he was Paul McCartney. The others were George, John and Ringo in their own world. They didn't have to dress up and look like a Beatle. They didn't have to put the clothes on. He could be unshaven. He was unshaven. And he was just flopping around. So when they'd been doing that from 1960, you know, all the way through to 66, being a Beatle, flying here, there and everywhere. It's a good name for a song, that. And it's, you know, it was just nice. I caught him in the right time at his house when he could relax. So that was the very first time, yeah.
Well, speaking of him relaxing, because on one occasion after cutting Paul's hair, he sat at his piano and he sang you a song related to his hair that he was about to record.
Yeah, it's funny.
Tell us about that song.
Yeah, well, you know, people think that Lennon and McCartney sort of got together when they were Beatles or just before, but you know, Paul McCartney and Lennon were writing songs from an early age individually, and then when they got together, they both improvised with their songs, and one threw in one little verse and this one would do the other verse, whatever. And he said, I've got, you know, one of my things was that with the Beatles was my conversation would be, which you normally do, is football. Football is always a good one to talk about, and especially then coming from Liverpool, you're either blue or red. And when I mentioned it to Paul McCartney the first time, he wasn't interested in football, not really. And none of the other Beatles actually were football guys, you know. And so I thought, okay, what do we talk about next? Okay, are you recording anything? You've written any songs at all? And he said, yeah, I did this song. And he started going, da 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 da, you know, oobla. No, that's oobla. When I get older, losing my hair many years from now. And he wrote that when he was 14 years old. And I said to him that, I said, Paul, I'll tell you one thing, that there's one thing that you won't be losing your hair when you're 64. And he said, really? I said, yeah, really. I did later on, one of the times I saw him years ago, I did remind him of it. But yeah, he wrote that song when I was 64. And when I told him that, he said, well, maybe, you know, it wasn't then, but it was later on that he said, maybe I should change the lyrics to it. But he didn't lose his hair, and he's still got his hair.
So you basically you reassured him.
I reassured him. He all through me that was good.
Around this time, you were also building your clientele by cutting the hair of many famous celebrities. We're going to take a few moments to mention some of these.
Yeah, that's lovely. Keith Moon from Wembley.
Yeah,
yeah. I got to cut his hair. See, there's a guy called Terry Stamp. You know, Terry Stamp was the blue-eyed film star, handsome-looking guy, and I used to cut Terry Stamp's hair. But his brother Chris Stamp was the co-manager of the Who, and
that's right.
He said to me, would you cut Chris's hair? So I said, no, this is at a time where men and women didn't have their hair cut together. You can thank my good mate Lawrence Falk for that, because he started crimpers and he got the first unisex salon. But at the time, I used to cut their hair upstairs, literally in the tinting room, after hours. So I used to cut Terry's and Chris Stamp's hair there. And then Chris said to me, could you cut one of the guys, the Who? I didn't know who they were because I was quite into the Who, but I didn't, they weren't the biggest band in the world. And I said, yeah. And next thing I get a phone call, Keith Moon, can I come in? And what a nice thing about it is that I happened to say to Keith, somebody wants to do a photo session with a celebrity with me. Would you mind doing it for me? He said, no, not at all. So if you look at the bottom of that caption, you'll see, I think it says Keith Moon's Hair by Leslie at Vidal Sassoon.
Yeah, it did.
It did. So
yeah, it did.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Leslie at 171 New Bond Street. Yeah. So yeah. So that was a great one, and he was actually really nice. And what happened was, when I got to do his hair, he invited me to a club called the Cromwellian, because they had a song called "Pictures of Lily" that shot into the charts. I think it went number 5, number 4, something like that. And I went down to the Cromwellian Club with them, with Chris Stamp as well, and we had bottles of champagne. Never had champagne before. I'm not a great lover of it, but Keith certainly was, and and I think that was his feed for the rest of his life.
Well, you also cut the hair of another famous star. We're going to see this now. Did you ever meet his brothers, Maurice and Barry?
Yes, I did indeed meet Maurice and Barry. In fact, it was Barry Gibb. It was the first one I met. I used to do the manager, Robert Stigwood. And again, Robert, through that, and I used to do Robin's chauffeur's hair, who then recommended Robin. Now, obviously I do look at hair the whole time, and Robin's hair always had to be combed forward like that, because if you pushed it back, his hairline was so high back that, years to come, I could tell he wasn't going to, his hair wasn't going to last for a long time. So I cut Robin's hair, which was nice, a really nice guy. He lived over in Notting Hill. I met his brother Barry. The reason how that came about, he lived in a flat in Eaton Square, and I was living in Chelsea down, not too far from there. And Robin said, would you like to cut Barry's hair? Now, talk about chalk and cheese with hair. Barry's got the most amazing mop of hair. It's thick, fantastic hair. And so I met Maurice, and in fact, Maurice, like McCartney, McCartney's dog was Martha. Barry Gibb had a dog called Barnaby. And like McCartney wrote a song called Martha, My Dear, Barry wrote a song called The 1st of May. And the 1st of May was Barnaby's birthday. So
I never knew that.
Yeah, so I used to go around there, and it was amazing actually, because whereas McCartney, it would just be him, I'd go round to Barry's house, and I remember going there one day with Richie Havens. If anyone knows who Richie Havens is, he opened up Woodstock, or was part of Woodstock.
Yeah.
And he was a legend, and they were just playing acoustic guitar. And it was fantastic. And I used to sit in the corner, little groupie as I am, and I used to sit there. And yeah, I met Maurice. Then I did a photo session with Maurice, who was married to Lulu at the time. And Maurice had a bit of a drink problem, so it made him slightly aggressive. And he did snap at me quite a few times. I didn't really like him, actually. I didn't like the way he spoke. But I can only say Barry and Robin were ace. And Maurice, only came across him a couple of times.
Well, you had a girlfriend at this time who was a famous actress, Susanna Lee.
Well, I thought she was my girlfriend, yes. We'll say she was my girlfriend, yes.
Okay, well, Susanna introduced you to 2 legends of comedy who became your clients. And she also introduced you to an American screen heartthrob.
Okay,
so go. Let's deal with the 2 on the left.
Well, the 2 on the left. There was a lady at Sassoon. There was a lady called Denise, and Denise lived in Chelsea. I lived in Chelsea, and Susanna was friendly with this lady called Denise as well. And I went round, and she said her girlfriend, Susanna's girlfriend, was a lady called Susie Kendall, who was an actress. And she was married to Dudley Moore. And so I went up to the apartment, Denise's apartment, and met Susie Kendall. and then I met Dudley Moore, which was great. And that was that. He had obviously Peter Cook. Now, Peter Cook, I think I did Dudley's hair once, but Peter Cook used to come into the salon. He used to love it. And he was a really, really interesting character. He used to, you know, first of all, he had the establishment club in London. And at that particular time, he was very friendly with John Lennon. So John Lennon, he used to live in Hampstead. I think he did live in Hampstead. And Lennon used to go around there for those dinner parties. But what the conversations I used to have with Peter Cook was, a great friend of mine who worked for the William Morris Agency, a guy called Larry Curzon, he turned me on to Lenny Bruce. And, you know, the moment, and Peter Cook used to talk about Lenny Bruce because he had him at the establishment club and he wanted him to come again. So we used to talk about Lenny humor and everything. And it was fantastic. He was a really funny guy. The BBC had a studio in St John's Wood, and I went along. They were doing their Not Only But Also show. So I did their hair for that. Well, I was actually just hanging around, to be honest with you. And I was just watching them perform. And yeah, they're the Lennon and McCartneys of the comedy world, those two.
What about the rather handsome man in the middle?
Oh, that's my mother's pin-up. You know, you talk about people having Paul McCartney's photo. My mum adored Tony Curtis. She didn't care about the Beatles. When I told her, I said, Mum, I had a phone call. I said, actually, I just said to her, Mum, I'm going to cut Tony Curtis's hair. She said, don't believe you. The Beatles didn't really matter to her. I had a phone call from their manager, his manager. He came over for the premiere of the Boston Strangler. I think it was 1968. And he was staying at the Penthouse at the Dorchester. And I was asked to go over and do his hair. Went upstairs and, you know, talk about a good looking fella. I mean, you got to remember that when I was growing up, you know, people, you know, he had a haircut named after him. You know, you go into the barber and ask for the DA.
That's right.
And there he is. I'm cutting this guy's hair. His hair wasn't like that at the time. It was the Tony, you know, that was the greasy Tony Curtis with the DA. I couldn't believe it when I went up there. I did tell him, I said, I actually said, you're my mum's favorite, you are. I said, she really likes you. And I didn't ask for his autograph. Again, I never asked for autographs for any of these people. And yeah, he was fantastic. I told my mum that I think she kissed me. Must be the first time she kissed me. You know, you cut Tony.
And on the right, we've got a very famous actress.
Yeah, yeah, she was married. I'm not sure she was with Peter Sellers or Rod Stewart then, but whatever she was with, she used to come into the salon. Roger used to do her hair. But the thing is that because I had been, you can see by the top there, one of Adele's haircuts is geometric haircuts on the wall there. She came in and she actually said to me, Leslie, my brother Carl, that's her brother, wants a Beatle haircut. Can you do it for him? So as you can see, that is a real pudding basin haircut. Yeah, that's who that is there. I never did her hair, but I got to do her brother's hair, and he didn't make me very happy.
I was very impressed with that picture because you're wearing a kipper tie.
Yes.
The last time I saw one.
Yeah, I've got off them now.
Yeah. So let's get back to the Beatles. Once whilst cutting Paul's hair, he told you who he considered were their greatest rivals in the charts. You remember that? Yeah,
I do. Yeah, I'm not sure they had any rivals. I mean, how it came about was that, you know, the Beatles opened a salon for me. They financed a salon. The King.
We'll come on to that one.
Okay. So what happened was he used to say to me, whose hair have you been cutting? So I would say, yeah, I cut Keith Moore's hair. I cut Terry Stamp's hair. I cut just somebody's hair, John Fred, whatever name. And Mike Smith from the Dave Clark and Lenny, you know, that guy, and Dave Clark. And he said, oh yeah, okay. And every time I saw him, it would be, oh yeah, I cut Peter's hair, Peter Asher, Jane's brother, and Dave Clark. Yeah, I cut Dave Clark. Mike Smith, yeah, again. And I kept saying Dave Clark, Dave Clark, Dave Clark. And the story goes that I had never asked for an autograph, but I have a cousin called Lynn who was fanatic about Paul McCartney, and she said to me, please, she begged me, please, me, can you get his autograph? And I said, I can't do that. And anyway, I was there, and I said, when I finished everything, I said, Paul, can I ask you one favor? I've never asked anything for you. Could you just sign your autograph for, just put to Lynn, Paul McCartney. So please just do that. I won't ask you again, can you do that? And what he did was, he leant, he was on the sofa, and he just leant to the side and picked up the Revolver album, right, which was his own album. And he just took the sleeve out, and I could see the album. It's got Not For Sale. It was McCartney's own Revolver album. And he wrote on it, and he said, is it Lynn? So I said, yeah. So he put to Lynn, I can't remember, best wishes, Paul McCartney. And in brackets, he put the Dave Clark 5. And I suddenly said to myself, why did he do that? And I worked it out, that in jest, because, Glad All Over knocked off, I think, I Want to Hold Your Hand.
It did. I mean, that was rivalry, because they did truly regard the Dave Clark 5 as the biggest threat. And conversely, the Dave Clark 5 also saw the Beatles as perhaps stopping their superstardom. So much so that the Dave Clark 5 actually had the chutzpah to plagiarize an album cover, which we're going to see now. Look at the one on the left, look at the one on the right.
Absolutely.
On the left is with the Beatles, and on the right is the Dave Clark 5.
Yes. Also, Dave is one of the shrewdest guys in show business. I mean, whereas the Beatles split their royalties 4 ways, Dave Clark paid the band members. They were band members, except for Mike Smith, who they used to write songs, share the royalties. And Dave is one of the, he's still alive. He's one of the richest entrepreneurs there is. But yes, he knew, because the rivalry was that you obviously had the Liverpool sound, and he came up with the Tottenham sound.
That's right, he did.
When they went to America, in fact, I think Dave Clark 5 hold the record of being on the Ed Sullivan Show more times than anybody else.
That's correct.
Yeah, but they didn't last long. It was a shame, because that was them. And I think a lot of times when the Beatles were interviewed, especially I know on their first tour, when the press used to say to them, what you're going to do after, thinking, well, it's going to last 2, 3, 4, 5 years the most. I mean, Ringo said he wants to open up a chain of hairdressers shops. That was one of his things. But Dave did Clark 5, and they had a good 2-year run, 3 years the most. So, but at the time, they were rivals.
On another occasion, Paul was feeling the pressure considerably, and he told you how much he would love to escape on holiday, but he couldn't, because he'd be recognized by all his fans. But you came up with a suggestion and a solution.
Yeah. Yes, that was one of the most scary, fabulous times of my hairdressing career. I'd gone around to his house, and I hadn't seen Jane, and I was cutting his hair. One of the great things about cutting someone like the Beatles, that obviously you see their hair all coming forward. When I used to wash his hair, I used to push all his hair back off his head, and I put it to the right, left, whatever. And, it was quite fun just doing that, just for my own personal thing, and then gradually getting his hair back to what it was looking like. And I just said to him during this conversation, I hadn't seen Jane for a while. He said, no, she's filming down in Bristol, doing a film. And I said, okay. I said, I suppose, because don't forget, again, he wasn't working, he was working from home. I said, you're going to go down and visit her? And he said, no, I can't do that, because again, if I go down there, it gets distracted. Are we going to perform again? And it's all about me, the Beatles, all about, it takes it away from James. It's not fair. So I said, okay, just carried on talking. I said, well, when she's finished filming, do you think that you'll go on holiday with her? That'd be a good time. You both go away. He said, it's got the same problem. You get the press will come around, and no, it's not a holiday, Leslie. And this time I had his hair off his face. And I said, why don't you go in disguise? Thinking that he could put, I don't know, disguise could be put a wig on. I don't know what I was thinking. I just said, go in disguise. It was just chit chat. And he just looked at me in the mirror and just said to me, what do you mean? And I'm trying to think what I really did mean. And the only thing I could think of was, well, why don't I cut all your hair off? And I sort of said it as a little joke. And he said, go on then, do it. And I said, what, cut your hair? He gave me the nod. And anyone that's done hairdressing knows that if you're going to cut hair short from long, you don't start in the front. It's a bit too, it's a bit too scary. You suddenly see all the hair just fall down. You go, oh my God, so what you gradually work up from the back, especially with men's hair. Started cutting it short at the back. Then I got round to his ears. So you could actually now see his ears, whereas before you couldn't. So then you're having your hair cut short. And then I started layering it on top, and to a point where it looked like that. By this time, Paul, I said to you, was unshaven a bit, and he had remnants of, bits of a unshaven moustache. And when I finished it, he didn't say, oh my God, he just went, what's it look like? I said, you don't look like, it's different, isn't it? Thinking that would be the last thing that I wouldn't cut his hair again. My only fear was that, I told you that the Beatles had stopped touring. I was just thinking when I left, what would happen if Brian Epstein rings up and just says, Paul, we've just been offered $1 million to appear at Shea Stadium next week. And is that okay? And now I'm thinking, oh my God, how does he know? I've cut all his hair off. Forgot about it. 5 weeks later, I get a phone. I look in the newspapers, and there's Paul and Jane Asher and his road manager, Mal Evans, flying into London Airport at the time, wasn't Heathrow, London Airport, come back from a lovely holiday in Nairobi, Kenya, on safari. And the first thing they say to them is, oh, first of all, Paul, we don't recognize you, did you have a nice holiday? And eventually they got to find out that I cut his hair, and it was in the papers that, I had loads of headlines. The barber that made Paul a skinhead is a headline I've got somewhere. The barber that Sean a Beatle, and it became great. It was a great publicity thing actually, but I never thought that would ever happen. I mean, that was a radical haircut. So it was. He had a good holiday on strength for me.
Well, who in your professional opinion had the best hair of all the Beatles?
Yeah, well, this is a question I was asked once before, Morris. I think maybe maybe another story for later. But
okay, we'll come back to that one.
Okay,
then.
Come back to that one.
Maybe we will. Yeah. So obviously you did meet all the other Beatles eventually.
Yeah. And
on one particular occasion, I'll concentrate a bit more on Paul. When you were cutting his hair, he told you about a concept album they were working on. It had a work in progress name that turned out to be something slightly different.
Yeah, well, again, he played me a song, and he went on the piano, oobla dee, oobla da, life goes on, and that was in 1968, which ended up, that was a song actually, interesting song, because I didn't think that was a Beatles song, but was Yesterday a Beatles song? Was something a Beatles song? But Oobla Dee didn't sound like a Beatles song. In fact, Lennon hated it. It was one of his things. He actually hated the song, and he let Paul know about it. But and they wanted to release it as a single. Actually, Paul wanted it released as a single, and they said no. But they gave it to one of their bands called Marmalade, that went to #1 with the song. Actually, so that's how good the song was. But that ended up on the White Album, which was the Beatles, and at the same, so that was that, working on this album. They were both going off in different ways at the time, and people, I think they were writing individually. There was obviously a bit of tension within the Beatles, but it was still okay because they were still recording together. And then you had the Magical Mystery Tour, which was another little. Well,
you mentioned the word tension, because I believe once you were at the studio, you were invited there, and you actually witnessed some tension between Paul and Ringo.
Yeah, I didn't know that. One of the things as I said to you before, I didn't want their hair, I didn't want their autographs. I just, what would be my winning the lottery besides cutting the Beatles' hair? To watch the Beatles record. And I did ask Paul, I said, is there a possibility that I could watch the band record? And he said, yes, I'll get it arranged through one of the road managers, Mal Evans, in fact. And then, you know, Paul only lives 5 minutes from, it wasn't Abbey Road studio, it was EMI Studios, but you could walk there. And the Beatles only recorded from 8 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning. They did the reverse thing. They worked at night, and the other guys had to come up from the countryside, Virginia Water, where the 3 others lived. And so I turned up there. Now you can imagine, there must be 1 million people going to the front gate of the studio saying, I'd like to come in, please. The people there wouldn't let me in. And I said, I promise you, if you go and speak to Mal Evans and say Leslie Cavendish is there, you will see. Finally, the guy did, and he did come back. He said, yes, okay, you can come in. I walked in, and I realized that this is when you keep your mouth shut, because this is a work in progress here. I went into the studio room, and there was George Martin at the controls. There was a guy, the engineer, Jeff Emmerich, was there, and I sat in the corner. Right, literally sat in the corner. It wasn't that big, the engineering room, but I sat in the corner and I could overlook the Beatles because it was only 4 tracks. So you had Ringo in one booth, then you had Paul, George, and John in the other booths playing their guitars, where George Martin would twiddle around and get it all organised. And I was just watching this particular situation arise, and obviously Paul knew what he wanted on this song. It was just Paul and Ringo there, I think. The others were there, whether they were in the studio or not, or taking a break, I don't know. But definitely Ringo was still on the drums, Paul was there, and he got up and he just ran over, or sort of went over to the drums and said, took the drumsticks from his hand and said, no, I want it like this. And it's like, started drumming. I didn't know that Paul McCartney is a fantastic drummer as well. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought, my God, how Ringo must feel, you know, he's just taken the drumsticks out of his hand. By this time, Ringo had looked up at the, where I was, in the engineer's room there, and said, get out. Not to me, there were 2 other people. He said, get out, everybody get out, everybody get out. And we got up and we left. Because obviously, you know, again, one of the things of why I was allowed in there, I never told that story to the press. I didn't tell anybody I was going there. I didn't tell anybody anything about the Beatles, to be honest with you. So I was allowed or trusted in the circle. I mean, my trust could have been broken if I had just gone to one of the journalists who would have offered me a few bob to say, this is what happened, but never did that. But that was, I felt embarrassing about that, you know, and I think Ringo got embarrassed. I was shocked. I was more embarrassed. I was shocked. And I didn't know that's what happened. But I suppose if you're writing a song and you know the beat and you know how to play the drums, you know how you want it. So interesting.
Well, moving on a bit, because in June '67, the 6-day war broke out, and you decided to risk losing your very good job to fly to Israel as a volunteer. Yeah. What was Vidal's reaction to this?
Well, very good, actually, because so I found out, I was 20 at the time, and Vidal also was 20. He volunteered, he went out in the 1948 war and joined the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. So what happened was, I told you, I wasn't brought up I was brought up in a Jewish home, but it wasn't Orthodox Jewish. It was a Friday night dinner and twice a year at the synagogue. But I remember reading a newspaper. In fact, it was the Daily Express, I'll never forget it, and it had a picture of Israel, and it had arrows from Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, all pointing towards. I suddenly felt threatened for some reason. I felt, because I was Jewish, because I didn't go through the war of what went on through the Holocaust there, I still felt threatened. And I went to volunteer in town, and really they sort of said, well, if you want to go, you go next week. And so I thought, right. So I went to see Vidal, and I said to him, look, I said, you know, I feel like I want to go to Israel and help as a volunteer. What do you think? Because I'd be cutting Paul McCartney's hair then, and I was doing pretty well at Sassoons, and clientele was building up nicely, and I wanted to go. Well, I didn't know what the situation would be with him. And he said, with my blessing, you go, and when you come back, let me know, and your job will be here. That's what he told me. He may have been bluffing for all I knew, but he gave me the reassurance it was okay. And yeah, so I managed. I did the following week. Went out there via Nicosia, and then we went to Israel by boat from there.
Well, good for you. Well, you did do that, and of course you did eventually return, and you did return to Vidal Sassoon's to work. But then almost immediately you got an invite from Paul to go on a little trip.
Yeah, a little magical trip. Interesting, because I'd been back and getting around to my dear friend Roger, the stylist, who was it was called Roger at Vidal Sassoon at Grosvenor House. He was the man, and Roger got very upset with me on the strength that I ended up cutting Paul McCartney's hair come the Beatles' hair, because it was all through his client originally, Jane Asher, is how I got the gig, basically. And he got uptight. You know, to me, Roger, as a lovely man he was, great hairdresser, to me, he's the Pete Best of hairdressing, you know. He could have been a contender, but he didn't. So he didn't like me. And I then get an invitation. Paul said to me, we're going on a trip next week. There's some Beatle fan club members going, and we've got a little crew together, and we're going to film. We've got to go down to Cornwall. Would you like to come along? You know, come along as part of the crew, and you could do our hair at the same time. You know, it was just. And I thought, how am I going to tell my mum? How am I going to tell Roger that I'm going? So I got my mother to ring up and say that I was ill. And, you know, going away for a week, and that was fine. So she rang up and she said, Leslie's not very well. And we met, so I met him on an early morning, about 8:30 at Allsop Place, which is right next door, Madden Two Swords. And there was Paul McCartney actually sitting on the floor with a guy called Ivor Cutler, who, is, anyone knows the film, he plays Mr. Bloodvessel. And he was just sitting on the floor. You've got to remember that Paul McCartney is still Paul McCartney. There were secretaries and people walking by and taking a double look. Is that Paul McCartney cut? That's not Paul McCartney sitting on the floor. Yes, it is Paul McCartney sitting on the floor. So we were waiting and waiting, and the coach was supposed to have turned up about an hour later. We were told to get there 8:30, so I think the coach was due 9:30. Time 9:30 came, no coach. This is how unorganized it was, or disorganized. They hadn't finished painting it yet. So it was still at the coach works being painted. And so with that, right opposite there, there's an underground where the guys, the drivers from the London Transport, they have a cafe across the road. And somebody said, do you want to go and have a cup of tea across the road? So I went along with Paul. Just him and I went along to the cafe, and we went in there after the night drivers having their breakfast, and Paul and I just sat there and had a cup of tea. It was really, really, really weird. But with that, we had photographs taken by the press, and there was a lot of pictures in the papers the following day of myself and Paul McCartney having a cup of tea together. There was also a picture of myself and Paul McCartney as Paul was sitting on the floor. There was a picture of me very near him. I was talking to a guy, the cameraman. So that happened there. We then, coach ride comes along. We got on the coach and we go down to Virginia Water and pick up John, George and Ringo. And there was this improvised script that was going on, but we were just driving, and it was, Paul was in charge. And, you know, I've said it before, that the Beatles is Paul McCartney. You know, Paul McCartney is the conductor of the Beatles. You know, the others, because he had a time, he always wanted to be a Beatle. If you go and see any of his concerts today, Paul McCartney is a Beatle. He'll play people, yeah, he's got new songs, but, you know, 95%, 96% of his material is Beatles thing. That's who he is. Whereas the others blossomed out and did their own thing there. So he was with the director, sort of improvising, what should we do? And the only really thing that was scripted was Ringo and Aunt Jess. They were sitting in the front row, screaming and shouting at each other, which was actually very funny. And Ringo, John, who wore a top hat, or a hat with a feather in, and George with an oversized jacket was sitting next to him, and I was sitting behind them a lot of the time. And it was actually really good fun, but we were being followed. I'll tell you how disorganized. We were going to somewhere called one of the fairs, country fairs, which they arranged to film. They put the coach on the bridge, and the coach is too wide for the bridge. So halfway, the coach has to stop. And then they realize they can't do it, so the coach has to reverse, okay? And then there was pictures of the paper that the coach got stuck on. So it was fun. It was fun living in the bubble there. And also it was fun as well that I'm watching the Beatles interact with one another, which was a really amazing thing. Yeah, we ended up down in Cornwall. The film, unfortunately, came out on Boxing Day. You know, as you saw with the coach there, it was very colorful and everything was very colorful. But unfortunately, it came out on Boxing Day in black and white, which was a shame. But you could just listen to the music and you see the music was worthwhile. So that was a very interesting trip, and it was, yeah, I loved it.
Well, I think you did actually have to own up to Sassoons to actually say where you were.
Yes, you just reminded me.
Something happened to you, didn't it, when they told you, when you told them?
Well, what happened was I rang my mother just to make sure that she told them that I wasn't very well, and I'm sure they would ring up and say, "How's Leslie?" And she would keep saying he's not, you know, he's ill. And when I rang my mum up and said, "Is everything okay, Mum?" She said, "No." They rang up and said, "If you don't get back within 24 hours, you're going to get the sack." And I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Your picture is plastered all over the paper." So I didn't, but I looked at it and it was, you know, I couldn't deny that I was sitting at home in Burnt Oak ill. So I thought, no, this is it, you know, in for a penny now, I'll just go along. And I spent the week there, and I came back and I did ask, you know, for my job, and I was told that I couldn't get it back. And I thought, and this was Roger, wouldn't let me back. He said, "No, you've been away." It was all to do with this Jane Asher situation. Tensions were very high. And he really taught me hairdressing. I used to cover up for him his private life. And I really did like the guy, but the tension was a bit too much. There was this jealousy thing. I went to see Vidal. He was over in Bond Street at the time, and I explained to him that I went away on the magical with the Beatles on tour, and I said, and I didn't tell Roger, because I knew if I asked him, he wouldn't let me go. I said, but the plus side of it, Mr. Vidal, is that the hair and the mentions always says Leslie at Vidal Sassoon, and so the publicity of Vidal's Sassoon doing the Beatles' hair, what's wrong with that? And you know, so he said, "Leave it to me, don't worry about it." I was worried about it, actually. And next thing I knew, he's had a word with Roger, and I was allowed to go back. Well, you can imagine the tension got a bit too much there. And the unfortunate thing, what happened, that something happened. He accused me of, he said to me when I was cutting hair and the client had left, he said, "Are you pocketing the money?" And I said, "Of course I'm not. Why would you think that? They paid at the reception." I said, why did you say that to me? And he was saying to me right in my eye, you know, right to my face. And he was, you know, he was a tall guy, and it was this horrible look. And I felt that he was accusing me, and something was going to happen. So unfortunately, I hit him, and which I didn't really want to do. I was just in a temper, and I'm not that type of person. But he actually fell to the floor. And I was a bit worried, and the receptionist was helping him. His brother-in-law, Joshua Galvin, was the manager of Bond Street, and he was built like a boxer, middleweight boxer. And they called him to come over. This is his brother-in-law. And I thought, oh, Leslie, you're in trouble now. You know, Joshua's not going to take this. And I stood at the reception, waited for him to come over. It wasn't very far from Bond Street to Grosvenor House. I saw him jump out of the cab. He came rushing in the front door. Roger, by this time, had been revived. He'd gone somewhere else. And he came right up to me, and he just put his hand out. And he just said, he shook it, and he said, "If it wasn't you, it would have been me." And I went, "Oh, okay." And that was that. And that was my little situation there.
Well, you continued to cut Paul's hair at his house. And on the day of the Magical Mystery Tour party, which was at the Royal Lancaster Hotel, you were invited. And Paul told you that the party was fancy dress. You hadn't planned for that. So what did you do?
No, you know, I did his hair for that. And the funniest thing is I saw these costumes of the Pearly Queen and Pearly King that were hanging around. And I was looking forward to the party that evening. You know, this was the get together of the film had, you know, been made and all the crew and everything there, this lovely hotel. And he said to me, are you going in, what are you wearing tonight, Leslie? And I said, why? So he said, you know it's fancy dress. Well, actually, I didn't know it was fancy dress. I didn't know it was a fancy dress party, which made me think, well, they're going as a Pearly Queen and King. And he said to me, well, if you want to see, you know, have a look at something upstairs, maybe there's something there you would like. And he actually did say that to me. And I was thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. Go up, what am I going to find upstairs? I opened up his wardrobe, and there it was, looking at me on a hanger, the satin blue Sergeant Pepper outfit. And, you know, it's like, oh, I thought I was going to take that out for a second. So I took it out, and he had a mirror there, and I put it over myself there. And for one mad moment, I was Sergeant Pepper. I was the Beatle. And I was thinking, you can't wear that. But I did a little twirl, and I looked at the mirror, and I thought to myself, you know, I wish I had a camera in those days. I wish we had mobile phones. I would have taken a picture of it. I put it on, put it back in, and came downstairs, said, no, it's okay, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. I'll sort myself out. Thank you. And I went home and put I think I wore my apple green velvet suit. So I went there. But yeah, it was very funny to actually see the actual jacket of Sergeant Pepper. Amazing.
Great story. Leslie, we're running on quite a bit, so I'm going to just move it forward quite a bit, if I may.
No problem.
And I want to take it now to the point where you were still obviously cutting Beatles' hair, and then you were one day at Apple when they were in Savile Row. And there was a very famous event that occurred at Apple in Savile Row.
Yes, there was. It certainly was. I had a good friend of mine, a lady called Chris O'Dell. She was a really good friend, and she managed to get a job. She flew over from LA, and she got a job, and she ended up working with Peter Asher being his PA, and then she became George Harrison's PA. And in fact, she got busy everywhere. So nothing went on at Apple that she didn't know. And actually, we were living together, Chris and I. And she said to me, she rang me up at the salon. She said, Leslie, why don't you come over? Make sure you come over this morning. There's something going on at Apple that you don't want to miss out on. Now, I used to go to Apple a lot. It was like my second salon. You know, I used to cut all the people's hair, the Apple artists there. And I got to know the place pretty well. But I thought, why would she want me to go that early in the morning? And so anyway, I get over there about 11 o'clock, 10:30 or something, and I walk in, and it wasn't like, you know, going in to meet like today, be loads of bodyguards there, you couldn't get in there. They had two receptionists, they had one guy outside. I saw lots of wires, and you know, I think the floor had 5 floors, and the press office was on the 3rd floor, which I always knew, as that's where I used to cut hair up there. And then you had one more floor above, and then you had the roof. So I could see a lot of activity going on, and I saw a lot of wires. Time I got to the 3rd floor, they had a sort of a spiral staircase take you to the top floor, to the roof. And I saw loads of amplifiers being taken up, loads of cables being taken up. And the way I'm made, I thought, oh, I know, I'll just go up the stairs. And then you had Mal Evans, who happened to be a very pretty big guy. And not only is he helping to organize, take the amplifiers and everything up, you couldn't get past him. He said, Leslie, you can't go up there. There's no room, and you're not going there, basically. So I said, okay, fine. So I just stayed on that floor. It was a really, really cold day as well. It wasn't the best of days. And next thing I heard, about 12 o'clock-ish, was Jojo Was a Girl from Tucson, Arizona came blaring out. And I thought, what the hell is going on there? There's obviously...
We've got a slide of this.
Okay.
Yeah, slide number 16, this is.
Well, that's what happened. And suddenly, while I'm there, I couldn't quite believe that they're having a concert.
There you go.
And there he is. And there's my lovely friend, Chris O'Dell. So if you look by the chimneys, you've got Yoko on your left. That's down that end. Then you've got Chris O'Dell. She's the blonde lady right on the far right. And then you can see you've got Ringo wearing his wife Maureen's red raincoat because it was cold. And you've got John wearing Yoko's fur jacket. And you've got George in his lovely apple green trousers with also a fur coat. But to this day, there's Paul McCartney on a cold day. Trust me, it was a windy, cold day, wearing a beautiful black Tommy Nutter suit with white shirt. He's got his hair looking great, if I may say so. And he's got a beautiful jet black beard. He looks fantastic. And that's what was going on. You could see the roof was really small. And what they had did that, in fact, the build up to this was the director had planted cameras all around those buildings everywhere. There were cameras everywhere. So when you go on YouTube or when you go and see that the film is coming out by Tommy Boyle, I think, the end of the year, it's been postponed like the Bond film. They had cameras set up everywhere. So you get all these different angles. I didn't know that at the time, but you couldn't get up there. And it's fantastic. And it was the last time they ever played, they played live. So yeah, that was an incredible, thank you, Chris O'Dell. I thank you to this day about that.
I think it's worth sharing with the ladies and gentlemen, if we can do this briefly, about a certain statement that was alleged about John Lennon's hair.
Okay, very quickly then. Again, we're talking about hair. John, the Beatles opened up a salon for me, which was fine. And you asked me before, Morris, who had the best hair of the Beatles? Yes. Well, one of these journalist clients of mine took me for a coffee and said, can I answer questions about the Beatles? Yeah, I want to talk about their hair. It's fine. She said, Leslie, could you just tell me who has the best hair of the Beatles? I said, well, actually, it's difficult. I said, but George Harrison's got fantastic hair, and I started doing the old hairdressing thing using my hands. I said, it's great. You can maneuver it and flow around. Ringo's got really good hair, thick hair, and that can be placed anywhere, and he can shake his head and it always fall into shape. Paul, as you know, has got really good hair. And on top of that, that was fine. And then she said, and she said, what about John Lennon's? I said, it's okay. Well, that is a hook, okay? And with that, she went, what do you mean it's okay? So I said, well, so he hasn't got hair as thick as the others. I said, well, no, it's not, texture's different to the other three. Let's move it forward. She said, do you think that maybe in years to come, he would be the first Beatle to go bald or lose his hair? And I said, well, I don't know that. I said, maybe, maybe not. She said, well, it makes sense, doesn't it? I said, well, yes, it would make sense a little bit. Anyway, forget all that. We said, thank you very much. Finish the coffee. I get a phone call from Derek Taylor, who is really the fifth Beatle. You can't get an interview or anything with the Beatles without going through Derek Taylor. And he rang me up late. The Beatles press officer doesn't ring me up. And he said, Leslie, what have you said? And I said what? He said, you gave an interview and said, John Lennon's going bald. And I said, no, I didn't. He said, you have. It's on the radio and it's going to be in the papers. We've seen it. Wow. So the following day, I went and got the disc magazine. And there it was. Not only was that in the third page, but on the front cover, it said, Beatles hairdresser, Lennon going bald. Now, can you imagine a pop star, let alone any pop star? We're talking about the Beatles. You ask anybody about the Beatles, they'll talk, number one, they had their hair. So I'm sitting at the salon, waiting for Lennon to call me. I get the phone call and he rings up, and the moment you obviously hear Lennon's voice, and he said, I said, oh, hi, John. I said, and then I went into this whole thing. I said, John, I really am sorry. I didn't say that. I was misquoted. They took me out of, they misquoted me, and I'm sorry. It felt like I was going on for quite a while, but it probably was only about 25 seconds, whatever. And they interrupted me, and he just said, don't tell me. He said, stop, Leslie, stop. He said, don't tell me about being misquoted. He said, look what happened to me. I said, we're more popular, than Jesus. And then this lady, Maureen Cleave, turned around and put it in the paper. that we're more popular than Jesus. So don't worry about it, which was great because John, of all the Beatles, John could be very tetchy, you know, and he could have said, oh, you said that, boom, put the phone down, never come again. And that would have been the end. And when we finished the conversation, he said, Leslie, I want to say something to you. So I said, what's that, John? He said, am I really going bald? So I said, no, you're not. He said, well, get over here quickly. And if there's anything on the floor, just stick it together again. And I did. I ran over to, got a cab, went over to Savile Row, met him. We had a little laugh about it. And he understood, which was nice. You know, he understood how the press can manipulate something. And there you go. That was my little, you know, Paul McCartney skinhead, Lennon going bald story.
Well, you know, there's so many other stories that we've just not touched on. We have run out of time with it. And Leslie, you know, it's no wonder that you've written your excellent book, The Cutting Edge. I've read it. It's a great story.
Thank
and
you.
all of us are so grateful that you did write it. I think it's an amazing account of those tumultuous, heady 1960s and beyond. I just urge all of our attendees to read it.
Thank you.
There's an expression that says, if you remember the 60s, then you weren't really there. But Leslie, we're so grateful and so glad that you were there and contributed to bringing your styling influence to those fab times. It's been an absolute pleasure and delight listening to you this evening. And I thank you for sharing so many memories with us. I'm now going to hand back to Dahlia.
Thank you, Morris. Thank you very much indeed.
On our Q&A. Good to see you.
Take care.
Hi, Morris, thank you so much. Leslie, you've given us so much material. You've obviously lived so many adventures that we can only dream of having one of them. So thank you for giving us such rich material to have fun with tonight. Thank you, Morris, for another outstanding job. For those of you that don't know, Morris does so much research when he puts these interviews together. So much hard work goes into it to give us a seamless and really enjoyable evening. So thank you, Morris, and thank you to Marsha for the PowerPoint. The research that went into those photos is amazing, wasn't it? Thank you, Leslie, so much for giving your time to support our charity tonight. It was really generous of you to just give of yourself and to share so much of your story. We have a few questions to go through, and I have a funny feeling some of these people might actually know you. So actually, Lawrence, who you spoke about a couple of times, has a question, and he says, where did you ask me the name of which hairdressing salon I'd recommend you to join?
Well, he actually said to me, he said Vidal Sassoon, and I thought he said Liddell Laloon or something like that. I always muck it up. And I had no idea who Vidal Sassoon was. You know, to me, it was Liddell Sassoon. He said, no, Vidal Sassoon. But I do thank him for that because I could have been with him at Eric and Baker Street. But thanks, Lawrence.
We've got a question from someone has signed it off, Raymond, not the Raymond, but Raymond Rockman. He says, I was a hairdresser in the 60s. The Beatles haircuts generated a lot of business. How long did your trend last for? What volume of clients wanted that haircut in a day? And what about the Purdy cut and the Farrah Fawcett cuts?
Well, there, the Farrah Fawcett cut obviously was a trend thing. That was a great style. One of the nice things about all these different people that Farrah Fawcett had that hairstyle. Then you had Vidal did the Mia Farrow cut, the pixie cut, which is fine. Me cutting men's hair, asking for a Beatle, well, not that many, because at the time that Beatle haircut had sort of grown longer. So when I got in 1967, if you look on how the Beatles' hair was and how my hair was and other people's hair, their hair was growing longer. So no one really asked for that real pudding basin cut. So, but yeah, people wanted, you cut the hair. As I said before, when McCartney said to me, do it as you see it, that's how it was. So that's how it was.
Phil and Evelyn Diamond said, really enjoyed that. Thanks, Leslie. Did you open your own salon?
Yeah, well, I got financed by the Beatles, and we opened a shop in number 161 Kings Road in Chelsea, which was part of the so-called Apple empire that was the Beatles were going to do. There was Apple Electronics, Apple Films, Apple Tailoring, which I was part of. In the end, they closed it all down because they just stuck to Apple Records label. But yeah, I had my own salon for then, which was incredible time. And yeah, so that was the one and only salon I did have, yeah.
You know that young people are going, what do you mean they closed it down? Now they've got phones and iPads, computers.
Yes.
All from the Beatles, eh?
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
So we've got one last question from Paul Israel. He said, I'd be interested in how it was in Israel just after the Six-Day War in 67.
It was traumatic, actually. I went to a kibbutz called Mccartney, which is very near Safad and Nazareth. It's right by the Golan Heights. And I didn't really know. I went north. There was a lot of, you know, when you got to Israel, you could have gone to many kibbutzes, but the thought of going up to the Golan Heights appealed to me. I remember when we go, there was only a small kibbutz, but when I remember going there, we went for little walks. We had people patrolling there. And I remember seeing, I do remember this, there were burnt out tanks up there, and there was the most horrible smell of flesh. Oh. That was my immediate thing when I first went there. And I, you know, it was a war, it was a battlefield up there. Not, I mean, they cleaned it up, but there was this smell of flesh, which I, you know, and tanks that you can see were burned. So that was my immediate impression what happened. I went back to the kibbutz, obviously, and that kibbutz was, because it was so near the Golan Heights, was very vulnerable to attacks. And so we were never attacked, but I'm sure they were attacked before I came along. I'm sure being a border type of kibbutz, yeah, they were under threat. So that was my very first impression there. But as I've checked on Machanaim since, and it's grown into a fantastic kibbutz. I did become the kibbutz hairdresser, which was one of my greatest jobs. I used to cut hair by the swimming pool. They used to dive in the swimming pool and then used to dry the hair in the sun. And I did want to ask Fidel if he wanted to be, you know, sassoon at kibbutz Machanaim, but it never happened.
He declined. That's amazing. That's great. So do you still go to Israel now?
I haven't been for a while, and yeah, I'm in the future. I'm looking forward to going there, and I will like to take a trip to Machanaim. I have been to Israel a few times, but never reached up there. I think it's about time I should go up there.
It is,
just have a
look.
Go
there without the smell of burning flesh in the air.
Yeah,
it'd be a whole different experience.
I will.
Well, next time you go, you are also warmly invited to come and visit one of our youth villages.
I will certainly.
You can see for yourself, and that invitation extends to all of our supporters. If when you're in Israel, hopefully very soon, you know, you want to spend a couple of hours just having a tour to see what the environment is like, to meet some of the children that you're helping, to hear from the staff what it's like working with young people who have found a way out of really difficult circumstances and go on to become incredible leaders all over Israel. The invitation is open. Just get in touch with us at the office. We would love to do that for you. I want to thank you again for your time. I'm going to wrap it up because I know that it is really late for lots of us. So thank you. I want to encourage everyone, please, to stay connected with us, get involved, whether you make a donation, whether you tell your friends about us, we would love that, whether you keep coming to events. Before I say goodnight, I want to tell you about our event that we have coming up on April 19th. It's going to be a really fun one. We've got some actors from Israel. Just after Yom Ha'atzmaut, we'll be celebrating a couple of days late. And we've got a couple of the actors from the TV series Srugim, which was the first really big hit on Netflix coming out of Israel. And Srugim's been described as the the religious Jewish Zionists in Jerusalem version of Friends. So it's a really fun, if you haven't watched it yet, you should, it's really fun. Srugim, we've got Ohad Nola, who played Dr. Nati Brenner, and Tali Sharon, who played Hodaya, and they will be interviewed by Liraz Hamami, who is also a very hardworking and very successful actor in Israel, but her stuff hasn't made it to Netflix yet, but it will. And so the three of them will talk about the Israeli film and television industry and some of their stories, and of course talk about Srugim. So the great news is that is a completely free event, so you just need to sign up and show up. And we have an anonymous donor who is going to match any donations made that night quadruple. So if you give £5, he will give £20. An incredible opportunity for everyone. So please join us for that. We look forward to welcoming you all back to another event in the future. And so on that note, I will say thank you, all of you, for being with us tonight. Thank you again, Leslie, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening, everyone. Good night.